Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Sidelines. I'm Erin.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Donna.
And today we're going to be talking about how sports news media is used to create awareness for marginalized communities with a special guest appearance later on in the episode. In today's world, many people would consider sports to be this inclusive environment, but that really wasn't always the case. And there's still these gaps in inclusivity and coverage for marginalized communities in sport.
Yeah, for sure. And like starting off with adaptive sports, I think like digital platforms do make a good job in like spreading information about them. But it's just like for a specific time for like the Paralympics. And if it wouldn't be for that, I'm like, are we going to broadcast them even more? Or why does it have to be just during this specific event?
Right. That is such a good point. The Paralympics, when it was happening in Paris, their TikTok account was so viral. It was so funny. Shout out to them because it was great. But then as soon as the Paralympics were over, there was nothing. Yeah. Nothing about the athletes, the sports, anything. So it just created like a hard cutoff, which I feel like is kind of a problem. And I feel like there's got to be a way to continue that coverage, even when there's not this big event going on to showcase them.
Yeah. And it's really interesting that we talk about this because I know in a lot of my sport comm classes, we have talked about coverage for adapted sports a lot and issues with that. But outside of the academic world and outside of my classes, I really don't see it get talked about that much or see kind of the recognition that there is that issue. And maybe it's because like my feed on social media isn't like tailored for that. Mm-hmm. But I just don't see much about that. So I think it's really interesting that we're kind of sitting here talking about that. And I wonder if there's almost going to be a transition where it's like women in sports, where we have that move to where it's kind of talked about during Women's History Month or on National Women's Sports Day, to that transition where it's kind of talked about all the time. Because I feel like now with women's sports, at least, we're moving consistently towards more and more coverage on TV, which we talked about adapted sports lacking. But there was a time where it was women's sports were only broadcasted if it was some big championship game or the Olympics or something like that.
Yeah. Right. Even though there's still that gap with women and men's sports, I know in the past year or two, maybe, there's still been such a big increase, even though it's not where it would or could or should have been. There's still a big increase, which I feel like is great.
Yeah. And something that I have noticed is I'm the same way. Like in the past year or so, it was really when the LSU women's basketball team started to blow up. I would see Angel Reese, Flau'jae Johnson, all of them on my TikTok For You page, on Instagram. And that's really when I kind of started to pay more attention to women's basketball specifically. And that was the first year that I ever watched a women's basketball game. And I cannot explain to y'all how hype I was for when LSU was in the Natty that year. I remember I was in the Dominican Republic and I was trying to find any way to stream it on my phone that I could. And that just kind of goes to show kind of the impact that using those personal platforms has to gain attention. Because like I said, I kind of became a fan through seeing Angel Reese, Flau'jae Johnson on social media, a lot of the South Carolina players, and seeing like edits of Dawn Staley and stuff. So that's just kind of how my fandom became. But how did that kind of come up for you?
Mine was the same way. I don't think if it weren't for TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, I don't think I would have any like reason to watch, really. That sounds really bad, but I mean,
now it's like we're so interested.
If I depended solely on TV coverage, I don't think.
I mean, me being a basketball player.
It's definitely about different for you.
Former women's basketball player here at Clemson.
Yeah. Hi. But honestly, like, this is going to sound bad, but I didn't really watch women's basketball, but because there was no access to it, it was so hard trying to find like a platform to watch the game on. And now it's so easy.
It is.
And like, the Caitlin Clark effect and Angel Reese, like they brought viewership so like.
Yeah. And seeing that increase has been really refreshing, I'm sure, for you as a woman in sport, but for us who aspire to work in sports media and stuff, that has been really refreshing. And I think it's important to recognize that while it's made a lot of progress, there still are those gaps in coverage. It's kind of interesting because I think it was the last college basketball national championship for the women's and men's in 2024. It was the women's, I think it was Iowa versus South Carolina, and they averaged, I believe, 18.7 million viewers. Yeah. And then UConn versus Purdue was the men's, I believe. They only averaged 14.8 million viewers,
That's
which
really interesting.
I thought was super interesting.
Yeah.
But yet we still see the men's basketball games being broadcast so much more. And it was kind of like that throughout the whole season last year. I really didn't watch any men's college basketball until March Madness. What about y'all?
Exactly. Like right now I'm not tuning in like, oh my God, like I want to watch this men's basketball game. I'm like, I don't care. I just want to watch March Madness because that's when the madness happens.
Exactly.
You know?
I don't feel like I have like a strong connection to it right now, but maybe that'll change next month. We'll see.
Yeah. And seeing it's, once again, I hate that I keep like bringing up these examples that have so much to do with basketball, but even with the Super Bowl this past year, like where we had Kendrick Lamar perform, Chiefs, Eagles, 2025 Super Bowl. The one commercial that really stood out to me was the Nike commercial.
You can't be demanding. You can't be relentless. You can't put yourself first. So, put yourself first. You can't be confident, so be confident. You can't challenge, so challenge. You can't dominate, so dominate. You can't flex, so flex. You can't fill a stadium, so fill that stadium. You can't be emotional, so be emotional. You can't take credit. You can't speak up. You can't be so ambitious. You can't break records. You can't have any fun. You can't make demands. You can't keep score. You can't stand out. Whatever you do, you can't win. So win.
And that was largely because of their focus on women in sports and a lot of basketball players specifically like Caitlin Clark in a male sporting event. Like they advertised that during such a big masculine event.
That was so cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed that commercial.
Yeah, it was good. And like you also see people like on Instagram comments like, no one watches men's now. I'm like, oh my God, like we made an improvement.
You're like, oh my gosh, I stopped playing basketball too early. My time is gone. But going off of Nike has always done kind of a good job giving minorities those platforms, whether it be adapted sports. I know they've given some Paralympic athletes sponsorships. I think there was a fencer, I think it was, that they gave a sponsorship to this past Paralympics, giving those sponsorships to women like Caitlin Clark, but also those racial minorities in sport. This is kind of an older topic, but Colin Kaepernick with the whole national anthem thing, that sparked a ton of controversy all over the media. But yet Nike still chose to sponsor him, which I thought was a really interesting choice because you would think, I know people who personally stopped buying Nike because of that, and I know people who started buying Nike because of that. So it's interesting to see how Nike kind of knows their customer base and knows, okay, this is what's going to draw people in and get coverage from that.
And they stay aligned in their values, I guess. That proves it right there.
So much respect for Nike because honestly, being such a huge like company, I'd be like, oh, they're not gonna like choose him.
They want to stay away from
exactly.
But that's not the case for them.
So I think that's great.
Yeah, and just as companies kind of choose what topics to go near and choose what people to go near and stay away from, media channels kind of do the same. It's interesting going back to that Colin Kaepernick example, where some media companies chose to not broadcast the national anthem. Others chose to broadcast it. Some chose to show people kneeling. Others chose not to. But the one thing that all of this had in common, the Nike sponsorship, television, even not broadcasting it or broadcasting it, whatever choice they made, people talked about it regardless. Like regardless of whether it was being shown on TV or not, people noticed, okay, they're avoiding that. And it started being talked about even more and brought even more awareness to those movements like Black Lives Matter and stuff like that.
Did you guys, I don't know, off topic maybe, did you guys see that because Donald Trump was attending, they like eliminated the end racism on the NFL?
I did see that they took
field.
that off the end zones.
They took
I
something
saw
off.
they replaced it with, I think it was choose love
or something like that.
it's usually hashtag end racism and hashtag it takes all of us, and they replaced it with choose love. And it's really interesting that they replaced that this year, because I remember back, I think it was the 2021 Super Bowl or the 2020 Super Bowl is when they first put hashtag end racism, hashtag it takes all of us on the end zones. And I remember that being so heavily shown before the game and talked about.
I remember that.
Exactly. I just thought it was like, wow.
Yeah, it's interesting how they choose to make these decisions. But talking about racial biases in media, I don't know if y'all remember, this was kind of a long time ago, 2018, when Serena Williams got into this kind of argument with the... What are they called in tennis?
We can call them refs, for lack of better words. I don't know if it's umpire, ref, what it is.
Umpire is for baseball.
But she got into kind of a heated argument about a few different things, got very upset. She was defeated in the U.S. Open
I remember
final.
exactly what you're talking about.
And the media coverage was just all about her outbursts and meltdowns.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the girl that ended up beating her, her huge win, was overshadowed by this. And you kind of wonder, like, if this was somebody else, would it really matter that much? I don't know.
I don't think so.
And it's really interesting that you bring that up, because you kind of, going back to women's sports, this is kind of almost like a women's sports and racial bias issue, is going back to women's sports. I remember the huge controversy with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and the whole taunting thing.
Yes.
And it felt like, number one, both of them were getting so much more hate in a sense than like a men's team would if they did that. Because you see men's teams and they do all this crazy stuff to one another, and it's kind of just like, oh, that's just competitive. Women do it, and it kind of gets down
really
to this
crazy and unheard of.
Exactly. And going even further off of that, it almost seemed like people took a little more out on Angel Reese than they did Caitlin Clark, which I thought was interesting, just in my personal analysis of social media comments and stuff on the situation. Once again, maybe I read into it wrong or something, but that's just what I personally saw. Do y'all remember that situation? What did y'all think of that?
I do remember, because like, especially I'm a Black woman. I'm like, they were talking about Angel Reese being ghetto, because that's how you call Black women when they're not behaving how society wants or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Caitlin Clark acts a certain way, so why is she not being criticized for the exact same thing Angel Reese is doing?
Exactly.
So it was just like so interesting to me, like why people were acting like that.
It brings a lot of attention to it, and you wonder, I mean, it's the same thing as the Serena Williams example. Would the media cover it differently if it was somebody else?
And I mean, to be honest, I really don't think they would, because even with that example, I'm not a huge tennis person, so I don't know if the other tennis player spoke out about it or not.
I'm not sure. I know that the girl that beat her, Serena, was like her childhood tennis idol.
Okay.
So it was like a really cool moment for her. And like, I feel terrible that moment was kind of almost taken away from her because of it. But I don't know.
I almost would have liked to hear, if she did speak out on it at all, kind of what she would have said about the situation. Because I'm sure Serena Williams, being her childhood idol, she probably would have had something to say, like, about it not necessarily being right that she got criticized so heavily for that. I know, going back to the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese example, Caitlin Clark was like, we were just being competitive. She was saying, she was like, Angel Reese didn't do anything. It's just competition.
It seems like they're like forcing this rivalry really hard.
People created that,
getting those views up, kind of what we've been talking about, but I don't know.
Yeah, and regardless, it all just goes back to the fact that no matter what it is, it gets people talking about the situation. It's almost like any press is good press, because even though and Angel Reese does a great job of embracing that, because even though so much of the press she gets is negative for whatever reason, I personally don't understand it, but whatever reason the press she gets is negative for a large part, she just embraces it and uses it to expand her platform, and I respect that so heavily.
She's doing such a great job.
Yeah. And I think that's really amazing, because from that, she has really used her platform to raise up the voices of women in sports, Black women in sports, Black athletes in general in sports. And this kind of brings us to our guest speaker who's about to be joining us, where she uses her own personal platform to raise up voices of Black women in sports.
Right.
And it's really just awesome to see how people in sports media and how athletes can use their personal platforms to do so.
On that note, I'd like to introduce today's guest, multimedia journalist and landscape reporter, Cayla Sweazie. Cayla, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little further?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Like you said, I am a multimedia journalist and I'm a reporter. I focus specifically on women's sports and also historically Black colleges and universities. So, kind of covering those two specific beats is what I do. And I do a lot of writing, a little bit of broadcasting, and yeah, that's it.
And I know you kind of grew up playing softball and you played softball in college at Morgan State for a few years. What kind of sparked your interest in covering sports through the lens of race and culture?
Yeah, I think that has always kind of been like an underlying thing that I was very aware of and very like passionate about. I just wasn't really able to like identify it at a young age, but being Black and also Hispanic and playing softball, like I was always a minority when it came to that. And then even like in school and just like the area we grew up in. So I think I was always kind of looking at things from like that race lens and just kind of analyzing it through that nuance and thinking like, oh, there's a Black softball player. She looks like me. Like, that's interesting. I wonder what her background is. And it kind of just spiraled into this passion of like journalism. So all my siblings play sports. I knew that whatever my job was going to be, it was going to be sports. So whether I was like a sports psychologist or I was a physical therapist or something, it was going to relate to sports because I was just so passionate about it. So I think that storytelling element was really like a driving force for me. So by the time I got to high school, we had a very good newspaper program at Potomac Falls, and it kind of just all aligned. I know a lot of kids don't have that opportunity because I feel like newspaper is kind of becoming less prominent, but I was just really lucky that I was like in the right place at the right time and it all kind of worked out.
Yeah. And talking about being in the right place at the right time, being a student athlete and having those experiences in high school and college, how did you kind of use those experiences to launch your personal platform on your personal social medias? I know you have a pretty good TikTok presence. I personally follow you, love the content you make. So how do you kind of use that to boost awareness for Black women in sports?
Yeah, I think for me, like it got to a point where just transparently, like being a student athlete was a lot. And I think it just got to the point like during COVID as well, where I kind of had to realign what my priorities were. In high school, I knew I wanted to play softball in college because I loved it, but I also knew I'd be getting a scholarship and it would help me go through college debt free, would afford me these opportunities that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think kind of using that as the foundation, because there was definitely days where practice was daunting. All of this just seemed like a lot. And you go through COVID and you don't even play your sport. So I kind of had that like mental battle of, do I have to do this? Like I went a year without even doing this. Like, what is my why? So I think that's where I really leaned into my major and journalism, because playing softball still gave me that perspective of like women on the field, or maybe women who are on the basketball court, or women who play all different types of sports. But for me, specifically, just like the softball field, seeing different players and kind of wondering what are their stories, like what are they doing and kind of what their backgrounds are. So that really helped me lean into the journalism aspect. And then from there, thinking about ways that I could kind of build my own platform, but also make it cohesive with softball. So showing up to practice every day didn't seem as daunting because I kind of knew what I was doing. I was obviously contributing to my team and giving them my time and giving them my effort, but I was also using it as an opportunity to show people like this is what I'm doing, and it's fun, it's really cool. Not a lot of people do this, and also showing like both sides of it. Maybe talking about like the mental health struggles and just all the daunting tasks that come with it. So I think that's something that a lot of student athletes should be doing, especially like in the era of NIL, just kind of leaning into their platforms, because sports will end for most of us, but those TikTok and Instagram platforms will live on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. How would you say your role at Anscape has shaped the way you approach storytelling and sports media?
Yeah, Anscape has been a really great place for me because it kind of curates all of my passions into one place. So I think ESPN was just always the goal of mine, and it was always on my vision board. And I had a friend actually send me a listing for like an internship opportunity at Anscape. At the time, it was called The Undefeated. So I just applied, and it honestly seemed like kind of perfect for me. So I was like, if I get it, like the stars are aligning. And if I don't, I'll just keep it pushing and find something else. And thank God that I got it, because that I've been with them ever since. But I think it's shown me that I don't have to be like timid or nervous to talk about these things that sometimes feel like taboo. But I think it's important to acknowledge those things. Like for so many like years, I was the only Black or woman of color on my softball team, and it was like unspoken. But now I feel like empowered to speak about it and talk about maybe the struggles or the advantages or just the experience as it was. So I think being surrounded by like-minded people who have the same mission and the same goal has really given me a sense of empowerment versus feeling like ostracized or like being the one person who's out. So I really like it. I think I grew up kind of on the other end of the spectrum, not really knowing where my voice was or how to find it, but now I really feel comfortable sharing those stories.
That's so awesome. That's great. And I appreciate like you chasing your dreams, especially because you're a Black woman, you know. And going off of that, from your perspective, how has sports journalism evolved in terms of diversity and inclusion?
I think similar to what I was saying, I think a lot of people are feeling more comfortable to share these stories where before it was really unspoken. Something I just wrote about was a player on the Ravens who is half Black and half Korean. And I felt pretty comfortable going into the locker room and asking him about his culture and his heritage. And I think in years past, like those weren't really stories that were necessarily being told as often. So I think it's really cool to just see people lean into whether it's their culture or their background or something that's really special to them. So I just think it's really important that people are using that diversity as the basis for their stories, because who's better to tell those stories than someone who looks like you and someone who's also been through that experience.
Thank you. Yeah. And I know you've worked on a lot of projects. You just mentioned one that you just wrote about with the Ravens player, but you've been to tons of events, things I can't even remember. I know you've been to the WNBA draft. You've done a few professional games. I know you did a program called Rising Media Stars. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what that entailed and kind of what the goal of that program is and how it impacted you?
Yes, so Rising Media Stars is honestly one of the best programs ever. It is founded by LaChina Robinson and Kevin Nixon, and LaChina is a WNBA and like women's college basketball analyst. So she started this program to each year select 5 women of color to join and just take them on like the best experience ever. You get to go to so many different events, and she just mentors you through the whole entire thing. And same with Kevin, they dedicate so much of their time to us, and it's a year long. So that's how I was able to go to the WNBA draft last year and how I was able to go to Final Four. And like I was saying earlier, it's really cool to learn from her because she speaks about those kind of unspoken things or those nuances that you will either encounter as a woman of color or just a woman or just someone who's trying to break through a male dominated field. So it was really helpful to kind of have her there in the waiting in the wing for us and just like encouraging us, but also telling us what we can work on and just being really transparent. So it was a very hands-on program and we went to so many events. So I think that really helped boost my career as well, because having someone right there face to face giving you like real-time feedback was really beneficial for me.
And you mentioned some of the events that you went to through that, and you've also been to a bunch of events for Anscape and worked on a bunch of different projects for Anscape. What was kind of, this is more of a fun question, but your favorite event or project that you've been to or worked on?
I think I would have to say the Final Four last year. It was just so fun. And I played basketball up until my freshman year of high school. It was a very short-lived career, but I always loved basketball. I just was never really good at it. And my younger sister plays basketball. I just think it's like such a fun sport. I also think it's really cool to see the shift of like so many people are watching men's basketball and still do, of course, but to see the viewership go up with women's basketball, like half the time when my dad or my brothers are referencing a game, I'm like, oh, you were talking about the men? Like, I just thought we were talking about the women. So it's really cool to see that shift and then to be there and like be in the locker room and kind of just connecting with the different players. Like, there was really no intimidation going up to them because we're so similar in age and they're just like girls and they're sweet and it was like fun and we got to bond over so many different things. So I think that was such a cool experience seeing them on TV and do so well and then getting to meet them and feeling like, are these my friends? Like, this is so fun. So I had a really good time.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your experiences with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Of course, thanks for having me.
We really appreciate Cayla joining us today. She offered a lot of great insight on some sports news media topics that we've been wanting to share with y'all. That's going to be all we have for today's edition of Beyond the Sidelines. To everyone who joined in today, thanks for watching and be sure to stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.